Hey everybody, how y'all doing? Long time no see. It's Andre here with Anderson Oil. Just checking in. I know it's getting ready to be winter time, so it's time to make sure that your cooling system doesn't have any electrolysis. An electrolysis is just having rustic parts and metal inside the coolant system. That's going to degrade the quality of the coolant that you have left in your system. So it won't really be keeping anything from overheating So that's that type of time is to check in. Thanksgiving's coming up, so I know it's really not too heavy on anyone's mind. As long as the car starts and it gets to grandma's house, nobody cares. But just a couple of things to keep an eye for. It's just your battery and the cooling. Kind of the coolant just going forward for the winter. Weak batteries will not last in the wintertime. They will not. They just don't. That's not how they made. And the same thing with the cooling system. I'm going to start a new segment, kind of like a Q&A for questions that I haven't been able to get to. If you shot me an email or message, we've been kind of busy the last quarter, so I do apologize for that. But there are a couple of questions that kind of have popped up over and over, so I just figured this would be a good time to go ahead and answer some of those. The first one, I would say the most number one I have going right now is about brake pads and the rotors and whatnot. So the question always pops up is, well, if I provide my pads, can you just put the pad on the old rotor? Well, legally speaking, I can't. But I mean, you can do what you want. But from my schooling experience, knowledge, et cetera, right? List goes on. You will want to make sure that the pads that you're putting on your rotors, you want to make sure the rotors are turned or machined, and that's just shaving off the old heat glaze, the old metal on the rotor. Or you can put on brand new ones. Reason that being is because if you put new pads on old rotors, it's going to deteriorate the lifespan of the pads, right? So if you buy some 4-year-old pads, they're supposed to last you 4 years. Well, now you just cut the lifespan in half by 2 years. So then you turn them into 2-year pads. You spent, anywhere from $50 to $80 on brake pads, whatever have you. And then just for them to turn around and have to replace them again in a year and a half, a year or so like that, So those type of things to be looked out on. And I would say a good recommendation during that point in time, if it was my vehicle, that's the time that I also do new brake fluid in the entire line. A lot of people don't like to do that. I understand because it's kind of a pain in the rear. It adds more money. It adds more time. I get that. But it's just kind of like good practice, same thing as replacing the oil filter when you get new oil, it just kind of goes hand in hand. Got to keep in mind that the life expectancy of brake fluid is pretty much about anywhere from 12 to 24 months, depending on what kind of brake fluid you got. Brake fluid still, the way it's designed is it's still going to allow water inside of it, right? So the water and brake fluid, they have two different boiling points, right? So we all know what the boiling point is for water, most people do, but the boiling point for brake fluid is different, right? But if you have brake fluid and water in the same line, in the same reservoir with different boiling points, you're going to get different reactions. That causes the holes in the lines. That causes brake issues, calipers beginning to seize up, all that sort of thing. Brake fluid be going bad, and also having to press the brake pedal extra hard just to get your car to stop. It happens by accident. There's really not much you can do about it. I mean, because most people park their car outside, So, I mean, if you don't have a garage all the time, you're putting your car in it. But if you're going to work, you're going to the restaurant, you're going to the movies or whatever, your car is predominantly outside. So when it's outside and it's raining, you're driving over that terrain, that soaks up, that goes all up into it. It mixes one and one. So it's always a good point in time to go ahead and get the fluid pulled out while at the same time changing your pads, changing your rotors and the shims and so forth and whatnot. Calipers, I got a question about calipers too. Calipers, no. You shouldn't be having to replace your calipers every time you get your brake pads changed. I mean, unless you just, there's nothing wrong with it. If you got the money to blow on it, go ahead, but it's definitely not necessary. I got that question a lot too. Let me check the next one. What was the next one? The other question I've been getting the last 2 weeks is, can you mix other fluids in certain areas if you're kind of tight on money? Yes and no. You can mix, it's common to mix transmission fluid with power steering fluid as kind of like a backup if you don't have power steering fluid, because of the way that it breaks down, it can work that way. But you cannot use engine oil, you cannot use brake fluid, and you cannot use coolant to try to put into your power steering fluid. As far as oil, no, there's no exceptions on oil. Oil has to be oil. I mean, coolant. There's an old school method. People do get away with using water in their coolant, putting it in the reservoir, putting it in the radiator cap just to make it home. But obviously that's not going to cut it. like just having only water in your coolant system is not going to work, but it will get you home, if that makes sense. Oil in your gasoline tank, negative. Brake fluid pretty much anywhere else other than the brakes, no. Like I said, transmission fluid is flexible. Obviously the transmission, because it's called transmission fluid, and then the power steering. So that's pretty much it. I'm trying to think of anything else. Those are all the questions I have, but as far as any other tip I'm trying to think of, no. And then just kind of for like a DIY, which stands for do it yourself. So if you're at home and you're trying to figure out if your coolant is having electrolysis, which I spoke on earlier, which is just an extra amount of, say, an abnormal amount of rust, metal, inside the coolant. That typically doesn't happen unless people aren't getting their coolant changed or it's a really old vehicle. So it's one or the other. If you know you haven't been changing your coolant, then you probably have it. And if you got a really old vehicle, then yeah, you probably have it. And like I said, the worst case scenario thing that happens onto it is it doesn't keep you, from overheating as well as good coolant would. And same thing as far as if it protecting it from getting cold. So, I'm trying to think of anything else. Yeah, it's getting cold. It's going to start getting cold. You got December, you got January, you got February coming up. So like I said, the top things I would look for is checking the coolant and the coolant system. So that's one. Electrical, so like battery, starter, alternator. You don't want to be trying to go to work and the car don't start. That's the worst sound ever. And it don't turn over. And then you talking about, you gotta text the boss talking about you late, right? So it's November. It's really not that cold. This would be a good time to go ahead and get that checked out. So we got coolant, battery. Well, we'll call this one electricals. So we'll go coolant and electricals. Kind of like I said, alternator, battery, starter, etc. For the battery, some good like things to know as far as like why your car may or may not be starting. And also for a little quick plug, I do offer all of this advice and knowledge for a subscription. But, just kind of giving you a taste of what it would be like if you did pay for it. So the battery. So say if your car's not starting and it's electrical. So if you go to start the car, obviously not starting, and then you go to jump it and it starts, then odds are it's probably the battery. If you try to jump the car with cables, right, and then it doesn't turn over, then it's probably the alternator. But as long as you're hearing like a tapping, like a tap, 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 or a clicking noise coming from when you turn it over, the starter's engaging. If you're not hearing that, or something's going left, something's going south, then that you can start there. If it's the alternator, most of the time you won't have any power in the vehicle. It'll just be black. Like no lights, no dash, not turning over, not happening, zilch, nada, nothing. But if the starter, the alternator, and the battery are all good, the last thing that's common that would keep you from starting would be the fuel pump. And the fuel pumps are pretty noisy if you pay attention and listen and don't have anything going on. So you want to stick your key in the on position. Well, stick it in first and then turn it to the on position. You should hear like a whirring noise, kind of like a that type of noise. You just hear like some sort of electrical humming, some sort of noise, something like that in that nature. When you're hearing that, then that should let you know your fuel pump's engaging. If you're not hearing that noise, then odds are the fuel pump's not engaging, and then that's probably what's keeping you from starting. But also it could be the fuel filter and whatnot. Then you'll have to have somebody inspect that, right? So those are your kind of go-to. So we got coolant, electricals. Then the next one I would say to check for the winter, since it's getting ready to get cold, you got snow, ice is around the corner. So obviously tires, brakes, that sort of thing. So that'll be here and that'll be here. Tires, obviously, it depends on what vehicle you drive. So if you have a front wheel drive vehicle, then you'll want your better tires in the front. But I know that there's some education out there that tells people you want the better tires on the back end of the side. But if you have a front wheel drive vehicle and your front tires are bald, then it's not really going to do you any good to have good tread on the back and bad tread on the front. So, and vice versa. If it's a rear wheel drive vehicle, kind of like Mustangs, Camaros, Chargers, that sort of thing. Now, if you have an all wheel drive vehicle, then at that point in time, then yeah, you'll have to get all of them checked out. You kind of got the short end of the stick there when it comes to saving money on tires and maintenance and whatnot. If you have a 4-wheel drive vehicle, you have the luxury of switching back and forth. So am I doing 4-wheel? Are we doing rear wheel? Are we doing front wheel? So you have that luxury. So you just need to know what you're driving as far as like if you're tight on money, you're making the best financial decision. Winter's coming around the corner. I need tires. where should I put them? Well, what do you drive? So those are the kind of things to take into account, like what is the next, because then if you have a front wheel drive vehicle, you replace the tires on the front. Now you've got time, you got time in between, say like now and April, right, to go ahead and get tires on the back end, and it's really not that big of a deal. So we want to pay attention to that. Brakes, of course, the telltale sign is, screeching. So I mean, if you're hearing a bunch of like metallic screeching when you're going to brake, obviously you want to get your brakes checked. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's always the case. I have gotten false calls because people thought their brakes needed to be changed, and there are shops out there that will take advantage of that. They will take advantage of you calling them and telling them that you need their brakes changed, and they'll look at it, and realize that the pads don't need to be changed, but you're already in there for a brake service anyway. So because you called them and your vehicle's there, they're going to take the service. They're going to take your money. They're going to take your car anyway. So you need to just take the tire off. Most people have a jack already in the vehicle, and a four-way or something like that. It really isn't that hard. It's not a lot of work because it'll save you about $300. I know it's like, oh man, but I don't know much about cars. Well, there is an instruction manual in the vehicle. There's a thing called an owner's manual, and then right in the back of the trunk you have, some vehicles, not all of them, but some of them, they do have instructions back in the trunk to tell you where to place the jack, how to get it up, and then how to remove the tire off. And then you can gauge it off of the four-way that you have to see what lug nut size that you'll need. Spin the tire off, and then just look at it. Most people know what looks good and what looks bad, right? So if you look at an empty cup of water, the cup is empty. It's kind of that same, simplicity to it. You can be able to look at the brake pads and they'll either be this thick or they'll be this thin, right? So if they're really thin, then that means, okay, obviously they need to come off. If they're that thick, then you're fine. A lot of the times people forget that cars get cold for some reason when it's cold outside because they're sitting outside. And so they think cars aren't susceptible to what humans go through. But a car is sitting outside all night, right? And then so when it gets low and it's 20 degrees out, that metal, right? You spent all day driving. You went to work, you went to your friend's house, you went to the store, you stopped somewhere else, and then you got home. Well, that heat has to cool off. When you brake, you produce a lot of brake dust on the pads and then on the rotor itself, right? So when it cools off, where do you think it goes? It doesn't really go anywhere because it's stuck and it's confined in an area, in a space. So you have little tiny pieces of metal wedged in between the pads and the rotors themselves. So when you go to start your car in the morning to go to work and you're going in reverse and you hear the screeching, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need your pads replaced. It just means that it's cold, and you've got metal rubbing on metal. And as you drive, you'll hear that the noise will eventually go away because now you're heating it up. The dust is moving. The heat glaze is spreading around the rotor, et cetera, et cetera. So some things kind of tune in to look in for. I also myself, if you're looking for a guy to just come out there and look at that, I do come to people's houses and check the brakes for them. Of course, it kind of just depends. I mean, we are mobile, so there probably will be a gas fee applied to it. So you're talking like $20 probably, worst case scenario, to come out there and look at it. You're talking in gas, but that's say $20 compared to $360 between parts and labor, and you're not even needing your brake pads replaced. So yeah, we do come out and look for brake pads to check for measurement. So if you guys have any more questions, comments, or whatever, feel free to leave them underneath this video or on the page. Shoot us a call or email. We're available. We're still rocking 7 days a week, thanks to you guys keeping us in business. I'm really blessed. I definitely wanted to take the time to say thank you, and I appreciate everybody that's watching and that continuously supports. We're trying, this has been a long-term effort project, and I'm blessed, definitely per se, so we're definitely still doing this full time, 7 days a week. The hours are kind of coming back a little bit. I don't know if anyone's been paying attention, but as it gets colder, obviously me being mobile, being outside, the hours have to go back. So I can't really do it 8 o'clock when it's pitch black. The sun's setting now between anywhere from 5:15, 5:22, 5:30-ish, around that time frame or whatever have you. So we're open till then, but I'm not taking appointments past 4 o'clock, if that makes sense, because wherever you're at, then supplies, and then the drive back and so forth, right? So, but we are open at 7. So I gave you an extra hour. During the summer, we were only open at 8, but we open up at 7 now. So you have an extra hour in the morning to get your vehicle serviced. And like I said, wherever, however, that sort of thing. So once again, thank you guys. Thank y'all for tuning in that are watching. Feel free to keep on the page and stay updated. We'll have more posts coming. I do apologize for how long that has been since my last video, but we have been busy. So that's definitely a blessing. I know it's a pro. It's like, I haven't seen your face, but also I've been busy because of y'all. So definitely thank you. And I appreciate it. My family appreciates it for sure. So you guys stay safe, stay tuned. Thanksgiving's coming up, so happy holidays and whatnot. And stay tuned. I'll have another video for you guys soon. Thank you. Take care.